Call this meeting to order.
The City of San Clemente respects the many people of different faiths who reside here. The City Council historically begins its session with an invocation offered by one of the religious leaders of our community with full appreciation of our shared belief that we are one nation under God. And while the City cannot endorse any particular religion, we respect the religious freedom and freedom of expression of all our citizens to pray as they feel led to pray. This evening's invocation will be given by James Jim Davis, Senior Chaplain with the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Welcome, sir. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Please rise if we could, and we'll have the invocation. Following that, Councilmember Donchuk be offering our Pledge of Allegiance.
Shall we pray? Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful community of San Clemente. We pray your blessing on tonight's meeting. We pray your blessing on our newly elected officials. Be with each one, Lord. We pray your blessing on our country, that you would bring unity to our wonderful people in this blessed nation. We pray you'd watch over our deputies that are out in the field, our firemen, all those serving, especially we pray for our students and our schools, our teachers and administrators. Bless and protect our community, we pray. Thank you for your goodness and grace and mercy. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councilmember Donchak.
Present.
Councilmember Swartz.
Here.
Councilmember Ward. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Ham.
Here.
Mayor Brown.
Here.
First item on the agenda is a toll road update.
Thank you, Joanne, Scott, and Kathy. Any updates for us?
Somebody go first, Mayor. Just the council gave us a direction in closed session to seek a temporary restraining order against the Foothill Eastern Transportation Corridor agencies. They have several $1 million worth in contracts on their agendas tomorrow morning that authorize work that's work for general purposes. Studies on I-5 widenings, the closure of Los Patronos Road, and other items of general public benefit. We don't think it's appropriate for TCA to be using its limited purposes funds for those general transportation purposes, and so the council authorized us to bring an action to stop the award of those contracts. And we'll be filing that as soon as we can get declarations signed and have it in court.
Thank you, Scott. Kathy, anything else to add?
Just that, as our attorney said, tomorrow at 9:30, TCA is meeting. It will be the Foothill Eastern Transportation Board. They dismissed the San Joaquin Board. They will be asking us to vote on contracts that obviously our city feels are premature, and we shouldn't even be asking to vote on those. So anyone that would like to come, your comments would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Members of the audience who wish to address council on matters that are within the jurisdiction of the City of San Clemente but not separately listed on the agenda may do so during the oral communications portion of the meeting. A total time limitation of 30 minutes is allocated for oral communications part 1, with each speaker being allotted 3 minutes in which to give his or her presentation. And I do have one card.
Great. Thank you. Brad Fieldhouse. Welcome, sir.
So they're being nice to us that, you know, we're finishing up our...
There's nothing else to...
I mean, they're really being nice to you guys.
Hey, Brad.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, City Council. My name is Brad Fieldhouse. I'm the president of a nonprofit organization here in Orange County called CityNet. We are going on a road show talking about the 2019, next year, homeless point-in-time count countywide. We're the lead agency on that effort. And this year we're changing methodology a little bit. We are doing counting in every single city in Orange County to provide accurate data, both collectively and individually as part of the cities. The date to mark on your calendar is Wednesday, January 23rd. That is the day that we'll be counting next year. CityNet is a nonprofit organization that provides homeless solutions to a number of cities in Orange County. We partner with law enforcement. We've worked with the Sheriff's Department in the flood control clearing out by Anaheim Stadium. We're the lead agency on that. Work with nonprofits, faith community to offer outreach services to engage homeless neighbors and link them to the available resources, primarily focusing on housing. Since our work in Orange County has begun in 2014, we've collaborated with well over 200 organizations to exit more than 3,000 homeless individuals countywide with a 90% retention rate. So it is possible. Homeless data is important for groups like us as well as groups like you. Accurate numbers are critical. So as a homeless solutions agency, we're committed to collecting that robust data, and we've conducted to date 21 Orange County censuses in a number of cities, including we just did the entire North Spa last year, or this year actually, and counted everybody in the North Spa. And so the county's contracted with us to do the point-in-time count in 2019. It's an important count because the Department of Housing and Urban Development provides $23 million to the County of Orange, and it's really based on that number. That's the number that they use, so getting an accurate count, even though it might rise because of the different methodology and the kind of the robust way we're going to go about it this year, it's an important number because it sort of allows, it determines the resources that come to the county based on that number. So we're going to need hundreds of volunteer teams that are literally going to go out countywide and use smartphones that will actually track it. We'll plot the conversation, so we'll actually create a geographical map, city by city, so that we will know who we've talked to and where we talked to them, and then provide all that to the decision makers countywide and to you guys as well. So the good news is that there is a local deployment center. We're actually going to be deploying out of FAM, Family Assistance Ministries, here locally. So that's good news. The bad news is we're still going out really early in the morning. So we'll be going out at 5 o'clock in the morning, so there's a little bit before that, and then we're actually going out again at night. So we will be in every city on that day, both early morning and late that evening, 7:30 till about 11:30 p.m. There still is space, that's the good news, so if you would want to sign up, you can go to everyonecounts.oc.org. Everyonecounts.oc.org, that's where you can sign up and get more information on the count. And we look forward to coming back and presenting sort of our findings to you after we're done. I do have a little flyer here that I'll pass out, and I'll leave some in the back for any community members.
Lori?
Question for you.
Yeah.
Last year, the mayor, our senior legal counsel, and myself participated in the count. So you mentioned that it'll be a more robust number at the county level. Will the methodology allow us to compare what happens in 2019 with what was collected in 2018 at the local level? I think we had 21 homeless. Is that what San Clemente had?
In terms of the by numbers, probably not in the by name list in terms of the registry. I'm sure. So we won't be producing sort of who they were, but we'll provide.
But just in terms of a trend, so
Absolutely.
I'm being told it was closer to 30. So if it was 30 last year and it's 60 next year,
correct.
We
will have a city number.
The methodology is similar enough that.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We have actually gone out with the Sheriff's Department already and mapped. Last month we did it here, so we sort of mapped all your hot spots. That will actually serve as all the maps are city specific. There may be multiple maps in some cities, so we will have your data from your city.
So when folks sign up, I was assigned to Huntington Beach and drove up there. Do they get a pick if they can serve locally as part of the enlistment part? Okay.
That's actually how it's set up. So if you sign up today, now at some point we may have too many volunteers for a particular city, so we'll take a little liberty there. But if you signed up today, you could check San Clemente on your box and then volunteer locally.
First come, first serve.
Okay. That's why we're asking you if you're interested. Go ahead and sign up, and we guarantee that you're there.
And can we get that on our city website, a link to this and everything else? All right.
Yeah. So Deputy Bull and Scott and I got trestles.
Oh.
And so I think we must have walked about 15 miles.
I didn't get anybody.
Lori walks fast, too.
Yeah. I walked the OC Fairgrounds, and I didn't get a soul.
Yeah.
So, thanks, Brad.
That's why we weighted the maps ahead of time, so we've mapped where the people are typically located. So appreciate it. I look forward to coming back and seeing you on the morning of the 23rd.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
So the question is, does it go into our count? Yes, the answer is yes, and I don't understand the methodology, but the idea is that the homeless person that may be sleeping at Trestles uses San Clemente services during daylight hours. So they might go over to the Carl's Jr. or the bus or something like that. So it does count as part of our count. Yeah, and I think we had 2 or 3. Yeah.
Just that, yeah. It was a rainy winter.
Okay. Can we have a motion to waive reading in full of all resolutions and ordinances?
Motion by Short, second by Ham. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0.
Closed session report, City Attorney.
There's one item to report. It was action taken in closed session at the council's October 2nd meeting, where the council authorized a settlement agreement. There had been a lawsuit challenging the city's short-term residential unit ordinance brought by Anthem and Seabreeze. We were able to negotiate and have council approve a walkaway agreement where under that lawsuit was dismissed. And that was approved unanimously on the 2nd.
All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion without discussion, unless council, staff, or the public request removal of an item for separate discussion and action. And I have not received any requests for removal.
Okay, let's start with Lori, Steve, Chris, Kathy.
N and W.
N and W. Kathy?
6A, 1.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Ham, second by Donchak. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0. Starting with 6A1.
Okay, I'll direct you to page 3 right away. This was a special presentations. It was the toll road update, and I am talking about the 3rd paragraph. This was just a public comment, and it says that we agreed, Councilmember Swartz and I, that we would request this issue be, we would decide whether or not it would be agendized. I don't remember us even talking about it because we didn't respond. I don't remember responding at all to the public comment.
I remember specifically it was just that we were going to leave it up to the board members, which is you two, to make your own decision.
Yeah, so I just don't know if it should even be in here because I have agendized things with TCA, but you know, it's odd for it. I don't want it in here.
I don't recall that coming up, that's something that we would be initiated. I thought that was something that we were discussing as far as one of the things that our legal counsel was going to go in.
But I just,
Yeah, so
I don't
let's
know
just
if
move to have that last paragraph struck from the record.
Yeah, I just don't want it in there that we agreed that we were going to.
That language is definitely not accurate. Okay.
That's all. And so I'll move the balance of that.
Moved with that change. Motion by Ward, second by Ham. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0. Next item in.
Yeah, I pulled this item. Staff requested that we have some people in the back audience here that'd like to talk about new fire cameras that are being mounted in the backcountry. So if someone would like to come and speak about it, this is your opportunity.
Works? Okay. Hi, my name is Brian Norton. I'm a Division Chief with Orange County Fire, and I oversee our Special Operations section. If you're not familiar with the reorganization that Chief Fennessy just completed, Special Operations has within it our Air and Wildland program. So with the wildland comes the cameras, because part of what I do is prevention work as well. So the theory behind the cameras, which we'll show you here in a minute, is basically, hopefully down the road as the smart technology continues, we'll be able to detect fires earlier. But on the front side of it, we'll be able to monitor and increase situational awareness. So I'm going to, you have the links on here to look at them, or they were provided? There we go. And if you have any follow-up questions afterwards, feel free to direct them through Chief Capobianco, and I'm more than happy to provide more detailed information. The purpose tonight is just kind of give you an overview of what's there. Let's see, let's back up to alert wildfire will be the first one. There's a method to my madness here, so it'll make sense.
Yeah, you can see it moving.
I wonder if they're trying to fix the monitor right now.
Oh, that could be. For some reason, I can't get to. Yeah, something's
moving.
It's moving on this one.
It's alive.
Oh, it's James's book.
So it wasn't just me.
You were good. It's me. Too many cookies. I'm not used to having a keyboard and mouse.
City manager delays.
So just for a little bit of background, we're really appreciative for the city for allowing us to get access to one of the city-owned towers in San Clemente. This will be one of approximately 14 camera sites we're going to have in the county. It will be part of a system that's going to be throughout the western U.S. called Alert Wildfire. In that, there's a partnership between the universities, both the University of California, San Diego, and the University of Nevada, Reno. So a lot of really smart folks from the universities are going to be helping us along developing the software, which is learning as we go. It's come a long ways in 10 years. It's going to come a long ways in the future. So not just pan-tilt zoom cameras, which you can move. There's also going to be stationary cameras as well as weather stations. And I'll show you how these are all going to work together to provide safer communities. So Alert Wildfire, right now, we have two cameras up in the county. See if it works for you here. You know, we might have to open this in Chrome. Explorer doesn't seem to work with much of anything anymore. There we go. So these cameras are going to be visible to the general public through a public website. The pan-tilt zoom cameras can physically be moved by designated people. The city will have access to the camera in San Clemente. The fire authority will have access to all the cameras throughout the county and some of the surrounding counties as well. So we're in San Diego Gas and Electric service territory down here. They've put numerous weather stations in and numerous cameras in surrounding Orange County, and they're going to start moving into the surrounding areas. So the installation here will be in addition to 2 more cameras going in just east of the city, which you'll have access to view as well. So like I said, this camera was visible during the Santiago fire, which was actually on in the governor's office, which actually got a lot of the resources from Northern California released to come to the fires in Southern California. So it was definitely an increase in situational awareness. What you have on here is the ability to put a time lapse in for public awareness, and that's available as a normal feature on this. So this is through the Alert Wildfire Network. And what you see on the right side there is just a mapping tool that tells you physically where those cameras are pointing towards, which will better help us isolate where cameras are actually pointing. The big benefit to San Clemente down here is there's the big no man's land known as Camp Pendleton surrounding you, which never has any fires that occur during the summer and fall, right? So the big benefit for us, as well as the county, is one of the things people question the most is where is a fire. There's numerous phone calls come in, there's smoke and everything else. This camera will be able to view down onto Camp Pendleton proper. We will be able to scramble out any sensitive infrastructure they have on the base, so there's no concerns with that, but it will improve the situational awareness for the city itself. So that's Alert Wildfire, and if we can go to HP Ren next. Yeah, so HP Ren basically is there are a series of stationary cameras, and if you scroll up a little bit, there'll be a time lapse on there that we can see. We'll just go scroll down and click on the link under environmental observations where it says read more. To your right, there we go. Doesn't seem to want to move on my side here. You can scroll that down. There we go. So that big image there. So click on that. This is a time-lapse image that came off of the Holy Fire. And just as an example of what we can put out for public awareness, but this was physically visible from the time the fire started, and we put this on a live streaming YouTube video that was available for the public to see. The cameras do have near IR, so they're visible at night. And there's weather stations, like I said, attached to it as well, and I'll connect the dots. So let this run through real quick. It'll show you the start of the Holy Fire, which will be off to the left. And this is through a series of 10-second images that come off this website.
This was the crazy guy that lit his cabin on fire, right?
Yep.
Look how fast it went.
So pretty amazing how well this worked. They're all high definition, high resolution. The number of hits they got on this website during this fire was more than they've had in the whole system, which has been in place for nearly 10 years now. Okay, and the last one, we'll show you how to connect the dots here. So the last piece we have here, which I won't go into too deep a detail, is called a Fire Map. It's also a product of the University of California. What this will do is pull in the camera images, the weather data from surrounding weather stations. And basically, when you have a fire that comes up on the cameras, you drop a pin on the map on Wi-Fi/Fire Map. It then pulls in the weather data, and it'll run a real-time fire model of where that fire is and where it's going to go in 5-minute, 1 hour, 3-hour intervals. The accuracy of it is remarkable. The benefit to that is if you have something that's occurring far to the east here, you drop a pin on the origin, it sucks in the weather data, you'll be able to predict where that fire is most likely going to go and the time frames that it's going to get there. So you can work with the Sheriff's Department to start working on the evacuations in very short order. So that's my brief introduction to what we've done. Like I said, it's more of a thank you to you all for the access to the tower to be part of the network. Any questions you have as follow-up, please let us know, but you will be able to forward these images onto your city website as far as Chamber of Commerce mode for sunsets and whatnot during the year as well. So it's available to the public as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. It's amazing stuff.
I'll move that.
Motion by Ham, second by Donchak. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. Chris, last item W.
This one's easy one, Tom. If you want to come over and look nice, you can, but you don't got to say much. So this is the, pull this item up here. This is a grant application for the bike trail on the south end of town along ECR, and this is something that we've talked about since the general plan 10 years ago. So if this council is ever excited about moving forward with the extension of the beach trail, we would have a continuous trail from Lowers all the way up to Dana Point Harbor. And so this would be an awesome amenity. So I'm, for one, very excited about the application process and hopeful that we're going to get it. But I just want to put it on everybody's mind that we have a really cool opportunity ahead of us, and hopefully it goes well. And just so the audience is familiar, since everybody's looking at this real quick, it's for a bicycle trail on the south end of El Camino, starting at Avenida Mendocino, which is the car overpass over the freeway, all the way down to just past Carl's Jr., and it'd actually be a road diet from 4 lanes down to 2. You'd have a bike lane on each side, and we'd have additional parking in some locations as well. So it'd be a benefit for the residents, for the businesses, for everybody. So hopefully we get approved and we can move forward and break ground. Thanks, Tom. Move the item.
Very cool.
Great job.
Nice presentation, Tom.
Crushed it. Crushed it. Absolutely killed it. Motion by Ham. Second by Ward. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0.
The public hearing process includes a staff presentation, a presentation by the applicant not to exceed 10 minutes, and public testimony not to exceed 3 minutes per speaker. Following closure of the public hearing, the City Council will respond to questions raised during the hearing, discuss the issues, and act upon the matter by motion. The first public hearing is a continued public hearing to consider the appeal of a denied sidewalk waiver request by the property owner of 239 Avenida La Cuesta.
And Mr. Mayor, I'm going to be submitting a conflict of interest disclosure form because I live at 233 Avenida La Cuesta, which is adjacent to the subject property. So I will be recusing from this item.
Okay, Laura.
He wants to vote this one.
Tom, how are you?
Presentation. Good evening, Mayor Brown and City Council members. Tom Vonnegut, Public Works Director. So the item tonight I'm here to present is staff's position and recommendation on an appeal of a denied sidewalk waiver at 239 Avenida La Cuesta. Just to orient you, the subject property, this is an aerial view, and the subject property is shown there in the yellow highlight. It's currently a vacant parcel. The big gray spot you see is what we believe was an old, that's the foundation for an old tennis court, I think. But the site's never had a structure on it as far as we know. This is a street view. It's a little bit dated. It's from Google Maps, but it still reasonably reflects the current state of the property if you were to look at it from the street. So that, again, is 239 Avenida La Cuesta. So as your council is aware, the municipal code requires installation of new sidewalk in conjunction with building construction whose value equals or exceeds $50,000. This general requirement's actually been in place since the mid-1950s, although the current valuation threshold was most recently updated in 2008. There are waivers which I'll discuss, and there is a special provision that applies here. It's water under the bridge, but I will get to it in more detail. But one of the off-ramps to get out of it is if we don't have enough right-of-way, less than 4 feet, to get 4-foot wide sidewalk, but the project is discretionary, the municipal code requires staff to insert a condition of approval requiring dedication of additional street-wide right-of-way or easement for the sidewalk. And then the code further goes on that an appropriate city approval body could waive that requirement. So, and I'll get to that, but I just wanted to explain that important off-ramp. The code also generally provides the city manager with the authority to waive new sidewalk, and there are specific criteria in the code that would allow the city manager to do that, and I'll go over the ones that apply to this project. And here they are, and it's a lot of words, and I'll summarize it, but there are a number of waivers, but here are the ones that essentially is what the applicant is referring to in various forms to justify your approval to actually approve a waiver which staff has denied. So in general, it's due to the location of the property or the terrain or the condition that would make construction of the sidewalk impractical or unnecessary. In sloped areas, that the construction would require a retaining wall greater than 3 feet in height relative to the surface of the sidewalk. When construction of a continuous sidewalk on a street block is highly improbable due to features like major structures or massive retaining walls or other major topographic issues. And then again, I mentioned the waiver about the 4 feet condition, which basically means if we'd have less than 4 feet of right-of-way, we would not require sidewalk, but if the project is discretionary, and this one is, we put that condition in. Just a brief history on the project. So it's discretionary because it came in, it's a proposal to construct a single-family residence, but it's discretionary and required a cultural heritage permit due to the proximity or adjacent historic homes. And so that's why it is. There's a timeline here. So that permit came in, or that application, excuse me, came in late 2017, which started a development management team review process that you're all aware of. During that process, staff noted to the applicant and flagged that there would be this requirement for sidewalk, and the applicant subsequently in October submitted a waiver application. Then there were some discussions, and it was agreed that since this is discretionary and there isn't right-of-way yet, that it would be appropriate to go through the discretionary process and see if the Planning Commission was going to exercise the ability to waive it, which the code provides. It provides that authority. And only after then would we continue on, because it could be a moot point at that point. If we didn't have the right-of-way, the whole process would have stopped. Turns out Planning Commission did not waive the requirement. They supported the sidewalk. So staff subsequently processed the waiver, recommended to the city manager who approved denying the waiver, and then the applicant appealed, and that's why we're here. So that's the history. Before I continue and talk about the applicant's reasons for waiving, I want to first make a note of a few communications that we've received. First, staff received a phone call from a resident in the area who was in support of the sidewalk requirement, but that person wished to remain anonymous. Very recently, within the last hour, and you may not have seen it, I was copied on an email that went to you from Larry Culberson, the president of the San Clemente Historical Society, in support of requiring sidewalk. And then you received, I believe, 2 communications from the applicant, and I want to address those briefly because it's important. The first communication, the applicant noted that, claiming that the staff report didn't address all of the applicant's reasons for a waiver. Now, the staff report includes the applicant's initial waiver application, which we felt provided more detail and generally addressed the same issues presented on the actual appeal hearing form. That said, I'm going to make sure I address any reason that came up, whether it even is in the code or not, for the sake of just being absolutely thorough, because it's our position that there is no reason that would support you waiving this sidewalk. We think this is pretty clear-cut in our view. You also received a separate communication where the applicant expressed their disappointment that city staff wouldn't meet in the field to help clarify certain matters. Now, to that, I'll say that this issue has been going on for some time. You know, I mentioned we first made note of this in late 2017, and there have been many emails and calls between the applicant and my staff. My development team is fairly leanly staffed. They have a high workload, so I made the decision, and it's solely mine, to decline a further meeting. I did not feel it was a productive use of staff time to again explain what we had already gone around. So if there's disagreement or any discussion, that was my call. And again, I mentioned the recent email. So let's get into the reasons. And these are verbatim from the appeal hearing form, to make sure that I don't inadvertently mischaracterize any of the applicant's reasoning for supporting a waiver. These two are related, so I'll address them together. They essentially say to the effect, well, the adjacent historic properties, they can't build sidewalk unless they would have a retaining wall higher than 3 feet. Therefore, because the code mentions that, you should support the waiver. And a sidewalk would require a greater than 3-foot retaining wall on the property. That's what the applicant is suggesting. So again, this is a Google Maps street view. It's fairly representative of the current condition. This is the property to the northwest at 233 La Cuesta. That's the frontage towards the turn in the street. It's staff's view that to put a 4-foot sidewalk behind that curb with a small retaining wall and grade to the existing back to the existing property line, there's plenty of room to do it. This is not difficult, and we don't agree that a retaining wall that would exceed 3 feet is needed to do it. Similarly, this is the property, I guess, directly to the east of the vacant lot. This is 243 La Cuesta. Again, there's a lot of frontage back to the home. To put in a 4-foot sidewalk and a retaining wall would not even impact the closest palm trees there. Yes, some of that landscaping would obviously have to come out, but we don't believe a large retaining wall would be needed to do it. So we simply don't agree. And then, of course, you've seen this picture, and again, we don't feel and we don't agree that a large retaining wall is required. And in fact, the applicant's design engineer noted at the first design review subcommittee meeting in January 24th, 2018, that adding new sidewalk would result in a minor pushback of the driveway, but would not result in other site plan changes. The property owner further noted that he wanted a consistent street scene, which is why he didn't want to introduce and construct new sidewalk. So it was really a preferential, not a wall hardship case. In discussion between the applicant's engineer and staff, it also became clear that the applicant was not aware that the wall height was relative to the surface of the sidewalk. He was applying that initially to the top of the wall footing, which adds another foot to the wall height. So that was clarified in those subsequent discussions. The third reason the applicant presented was that retaining walls and sidewalks constructed along the frontage of the historic homes would detract from their value, and would not be constructed, and that those homes would not be constructed or conditioned to be constructed, and that recent work at those homes were not conditioned with sidewalk. Well, first of all, this isn't a criterion that's in the code to use to support a waiver. Regardless, I'll address it and simply say that in all of the design review subcommittee meetings, and there were 3, at the Planning Commission discussion, there was no issue or concern that potential future retaining walls on the historic property were going to detract or otherwise conflict with any historic defining features of the properties. So that just didn't come up. And as I mentioned, the president of the San Clemente Historical Society spoke in support at the first meeting for putting sidewalk in on this property. In terms of the work, we would treat those properties like anyone else. So if either of those historic properties came in with a project that would exceed the trigger that I talked about, we would condition them accordingly and go through the process. There has been recent work, and I've reviewed the permit history going back to the most recent valuation of $50,000, all the way back to 2008. They weren't conditioned for sidewalk because none of the improvements, either individually or collectively over that 10-year time period, exceeded $50,000. That's easily verifiable by anyone in our track-it system. So there's that. The fourth reason is that the applicant presented is that parking is restricted on the project side of the street, and pedestrians can use the existing sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. So again, this doesn't relate, and there is no provision in the code that allows this type of reasoning to waive new sidewalk. But again, regardless, I'll explain that there is a daytime parking restriction on that side of the street from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. But it doesn't matter because installation of sidewalk isn't dependent on vehicle parking restrictions. We're doing this for mobility and to help pedestrian movement. It is also a little bit ironic that the sidewalk mentioned on the other side was actually constructed with a recent development of a project that was triggered by the requirement that we're actually debating tonight. Number 5, that sidewalk will never be extended past the historic home to the east. That was one of the homes I presented in the photos, and I'll show this property, because the next home up the street is constructed too close to Avenida La Cuesta to allow adequate room for a 4-foot wide sidewalk, and ADA requires that. This is the property that the applicant's engineer is talking about. And again, this sidewalk predates ADA. It's a 6-inch curb plus 2.5-foot wide sidewalk, 3-foot path of travel. That block wall is nominally 2 to 2.5 feet. The 6-inch high block, the highest point, is never exceeding 2.5 feet. It's staff's view that it would not take a lot of effort to get a 3-foot high wall and proper grading to get back to get a 4-foot sidewalk when and if this project ever comes again to trigger that requirement. This project has had improvements too. They've not triggered it. Therefore, we haven't conditioned it to improve the sidewalk. So we simply don't agree, and we have a path of travel, and this is better than most cases where we don't, and to us, it's an incremental change to get it to 4 feet when this project triggers the requirements. The applicant also mentioned that existing light poles, utilities, pilasters, and driveways along the street block restrict the ability to have a 4-foot wide sidewalk. This issue and this reasoning comes up often. The provision to construct ADA compliant sidewalk applies to the construction of the new sidewalk on the applicant's property. There is no provision in the Muni Code, and there is no provision in ADA that requires that all of the other existing sidewalk sections have to meet ADA before we can require a specific property to actually implement sidewalk. If it did, we would be caught in a chicken and egg situation where we would never be incrementally improving our sidewalk network. So it doesn't make sense. I'll also note in a prior appeal to the City Council, not your City Council, but a prior City Council, that council didn't agree with this argument about existing features. We can and do address those over time. So if a new project is conditioned, we have ways to deal with that. We have moved facilities and structures to get compliant sidewalk. That happens on a case-by-case basis, and as your council's aware, it happens over time as projects improve and properties are redeveloped. Now let me just make a couple final points about the original waiver request to make sure I've missed nothing. Some already mirror the arguments you've heard, and they are discussed in more detail in the staff report, but they concern, the first bullet point is regarding new sidewalk on adjacent properties and impacts on historic structures. Again, not a provision and not raised as an issue or concern anywhere during the discretionary approval process. And I should note, in June of 2018, the Planning Commission did approve the cultural heritage permit, and there is now a building permit application in plan check. Similarly, that the property to the west has improvements that make sidewalk unlikely. This is the reference to things like pilasters and so forth, which can be relatively easily moved or gotten around. That the street grade is too steep and it can't meet ADA. Well, yes, we know this, and the ADA has an off-ramp, no pun intended, to allow sidewalk that is concurrent and adjacent to the street grade to match the street grade. If it didn't, only towns that were 2% or flatter would have sidewalk in the entire country, so it's just not an issue. And then finally, that the subject property would need significant grading to install sidewalk, and we just don't believe that's true. I've shown you the photo. There is going to be grading associated with the project anyway. The applicant's not yet submitted a grading plan, probably because they want to wait for the outcome of your decision tonight. Grading is relatively inexpensive. It's already going to happen on this job. It would be a minor thing to shave it back or do a small wall that still doesn't exceed 3 feet. We just don't view that as a reasonable excuse. finally, it's our conclusion that the waiver request doesn't meet any of the prescribed criteria to allow a waiver of the new sidewalk requirement. As I mentioned, the project site is going to require grading of the site anyway, and a sidewalk would not significantly impact that operation. The building alone, minus the valuation of future grading to come in, the valuation under the current permit exceeds $1 million. And the cost to install gray sidewalk along the frontage where there's no driveway, because the driveway's already in the project cost, we're talking about a $5,000 sidewalk. That's at prevailing wage cost that the applicant won't be paying. If you add a retaining wall, maybe you're adding another $10,000 for 15 to 20,000 sidewalk. That is less than, or 1% or less of the total project cost. So, and the applicant, to be fair, has never claimed that there was a cost hardship issue, but I just want to point out this is insignificant to the project. It can be done, and I would respectfully suggest if we can't do sidewalk on a project like this where they're starting from scratch, we might need to reconsider our criteria. And again, as I mentioned, the Planning Commission did not avail itself of the opportunity that the code provides. They unanimously supported, 5 in support, no opposed, and 1 abstention to have the sidewalk be required and to require the applicant to dedicate some easement and do the sidewalk. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and the staff recommendation is in your packet.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom? Exhaustive. Let's hear from the applicant. Do I need to open a public hearing here? I should know that by now. Joanne? Yeah. Let's open the public hearing. We have a card from the applicant, Steve Austin.
He doesn't look like Steve Austin to me.
Yeah. Stone Cold.
I get that a lot.
Too much.
That or Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the two. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I appreciate staff taking the time to prepare such a detailed response. I wish that we could have received that in the staff report. And we also wish we had the opportunity to go out and sit with staff and at the site and pull a measuring tape and kind of show them what we're seeing. We believe that there will never be sidewalk along the frontage of this block. And you'll see that the images that we prepared are the same images that were used by staff, which were the ones that we had sent for our last council meeting. We disagree. We measured this retaining wall, and closest to the intersection, it is 3 feet. So having to put in a retaining wall, putting in sidewalk there with the amount of clearance that's needed per ADA would require a retaining wall higher than 3 feet. And additionally, looking at how close that structure is to the existing street, it's very close. And to be able to put in that additional retaining wall and that grading, my understanding is that these retaining walls were put in without a permit, and according to Zach, there's a chance that this would be required to be revised, but the slope between those 2 retaining walls is significant, and if you were to grade that with a 2-to-1 slope, which is what would be required, you would start impacting that existing structure. Here's a better view of the light pole and the utilities and the existing driveway that goes into the historic property. And for our discussion tonight, I'm going to refer to that property as property 2. The property we were just looking at before would be 3. Our property is property 1, and then the one to the left of the subject property is property 4. So property 2, we've discussed, is on the National Historic Register, and you can see there that there's a light pole and utilities and then the driveway. The retaining wall that's currently holding back that slope and that vegetation with the palm tree is just about 3 feet. In order to get an ADA accessible path around that pole and then behind the driveway, which is what would be required, you're talking about an impact of about up to 9 feet from the curb face. 9 feet from the curb face is going to have significant impact on the driveway, as well as require retaining walls more than 3 feet. In addition to that, you can see the nice vegetation that works with this National Historic Home, and the idea of having a retaining wall all through that property and removing that vegetation, we just don't see that as likely to happen. Here's a better view of that same vegetation. There's a palm tree here in the center of this view that if you were to go back 4 feet and put in a retaining wall, there's no way that that palm tree would be able to stay. And just drawing your attention quickly to the existing retaining wall, you'll see that it's stepped, right? Because this street is almost a 10% slope street. So now when we're looking at the this corner, so this is the corner between property 4 and property 1. And the grades in this location would absolutely require a retaining wall that is higher than 3 feet. One of the main reasons why is because of the existing grades and tying into the existing grade next to the neighbor. The other is because of stepping that would be required on a retaining wall to make that work properly. I'd also like to draw your attention to the utilities that are in the center of that photo. So those are Edison, there's an Edison vault and some other Edison utilities there. Our experience in working with Edison is that it takes a lot of time and there's a lot of costs associated with that. I personally haven't seen many utilities moved for less than $50,000, so that could potentially be a significant impact or significant cost. One of the other points we'd like to raise is if you look at property 4 and you look at their pool and their spa and their deck, that is very, very close to the existing street curb, and there's no way that that sidewalk would be able to be put into that location. So just again, this block is very unlikely to ever receive sidewalk. Now, if we go down the street a little bit further, down Avenida La Cuesta, there's a property that recently received a waiver to put in sidewalk. And that waiver, that property has significantly less impacts, or it's more likely to be able to receive sidewalk in the future than these properties that we've been reviewing. Now, to the point of going through the cultural heritage process and then planning commission, in those meetings we started to discuss sidewalk, and we were always told that it would be punted to planning commission and city council. In the city council meeting, we were told that the focus was on the heritage permit, cultural heritage permit, and that it would essentially be punted again to city council. Now, after that meeting, we had discussions with Zach, and in those discussions, he felt like, you know what, there probably was a good reason to justify the waiver. So just to be clear, the city engineer mentioned that there were no justifications for the waiver. Per section 12.08020A1, that one allows for a waiver if the location, terrain, conditions of the property, or something similar justify the waiver. He also mentioned that if the likelihood of having sidewalk through the block is not likely, that would be a good justification for the waiver. He did not mention the cost of relocating utilities, which would be significant, especially considering the type of utilities that would need to be moved. That cost would be quite significant, more than just the cost of grading and retaining wall, which we beg to differ on the cost that the engineer proposed. The objective, as we understand it, is for sidewalk to be put throughout San Clemente. We think that this ordinance is a great ordinance, and we feel like it's definitely needed in lots of places. In this particular area, there's new sidewalk and an ADA ramp here that goes down along this frontage. And then from this intersection here, it continues to go up with sidewalk. Looking at the proximity of house number 3 to the right-of-way, doesn't make sense. It will not, the likelihood of ever having full width sidewalk there is very unlikely. Also with property 2, very unlikely, and property 4. On the other side of the street, there's actually more right-of-way available for sidewalk. The properties on that side of the street have 3.5 feet of right-of-way available for sidewalk. The properties on the subject side of the property have 2 feet. So we recognize and understand that the city is trying to get sidewalk in as many places as they can. This particular location, we do not believe that there will ever be sidewalk. We do propose that hopefully as a way of making sure that in the future the city has the opportunity to build sidewalk there in the event that sidewalk is ever built on those adjacent properties, that the owner would dedicate the right-of-way required to put that sidewalk in. So we hope that you will consider this, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. I believe the property owner would like to say a few words.
That's right. Thank you. Richard Romney?
Somebody
else would speak.
What's that?
That was 10 minutes. Do you want to allow more?
We could just couple onto here and do 5 more minutes.
5 more?
Yeah. Oh, sir.
My name's Rich Romney, and thank you for hearing me. I don't have a lot to say. I'm just kind of following the process. But I would hope that the city council would have a little empathy. I started 10 months ago and spent a lot of money in trying to get the cultural heritage permit done, and it just seems that there's more to be had. It's not a $5,000 sidewalk, or I would do it. And so as far as having an economic burden on my project, it definitely does. The engineer said that he didn't hear me say that, but tonight I'm saying it. And I'm hoping that City Council will see the reality of whether a sidewalk is practical there or not. And the neighbors on both sides are opposing it, from what I understand, and one neighbor's going to speak tonight, and the other neighbors resided from voting. But anyway, I hope that you recognize that from one end of the street, from one point of the sidewalk to the next point of the sidewalk, we're removing utilities, mailboxes that's been there for a long time, and I mean masonry structures. And I'll just let it be at that. I think you understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully maybe get some sympathy with this.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Next is Lee Van Slyke.
Thank you. My name is Lee Van Slyke, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My wife and I have been improving the property at 243 Avenida La Cuesta, property number 2, I guess, in your way of counting that. And we are very much concerned that the sidewalk will detract from the historical perspective. We're very happy to see this property get developed. Don't misunderstand us. We really like the plan that's been finally approved by the Planning Commission, and appreciate that the builder has worked with the Design Review and the Planning Commission to get through that. We like the deal, and we would really like to see just landscaping And the right-of-way, the easement that the developer is proposing for now, we think it's probably going to be 40 years before there's ever sidewalks on either side of that. And as long as the city had the ability someday to put it in, it would be useful. In the absence of sidewalks being at 233 or 243 La Cuesta, there's really nothing to be gained by putting a bunch of concrete there between the beautiful landscaping in the two historic sites. It really is just going to be a bunch of concrete and a bunch of eyesore. And our feeling as people who are trying to make that aesthetically a beautiful area is that we want to keep it as close to the historic way as it can be. But we understand the city's desire long-term for sidewalks, and we think that the developer has proposed a reasonable long-term solution without requiring right now a bunch of concrete to be poured that doesn't connect to anything. The other thing is safety. In this picture you can see at the intersection of Avenida La Cuesta and Patero del Oro, there are 2 boulevard stop signs. And anybody who's ever watched traffic accident information like that at the high school knows that when people cross the street at a boulevard stop sign, it's relatively safe. When they cross the street not at a boulevard stop sign, it increases the risk dramatically. I think the only loss of time injury at the high school has been a student who was 30 feet from the crosswalk at Pico when he was hit by a car. People respect, they don't always come to a full stop, but they respect that as a place for people to cross the street. Putting in a sidewalk at property number 1, that if you park there and then you're going to go someplace that has a sidewalk, you got to cross the street and without a boulevard stop, it's not safe. We really think the safety aspect of this has been overlooked. But aesthetics is our main concern as people working on the house. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Any more cards on this item? With that, I'll close the public hearing. And what is the council's pleasure?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. So I appreciate the application being submitted. We have a process here in San Clemente, and I love seeing due process being played out at this level. I think Frank had an excellent review of the application and reasons why it's being denied. I, for one, am going to support the denial of the application. When you look at the subject property, you look directly across the street, and we talk about things like grade. We literally required 2 homes directly across the street to build a sidewalk. You guys all know that I'm a huge supporter of sidewalks in town. The fact that we ever allowed anyone to build a home without a sidewalk is beyond me. Any other municipality in the state of California would require you to build a sidewalk when you're building a home. So I'm going to be supportive of it. I think it's not fair to be giving out waivers to communities, especially when we've not granted them directly across the street and we've had requirements. Most of the points that were outlined in here by the applicant were points that relate to the adjacent properties and not the property in question. So of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points, 3 of them, excuse me, are relating to adjacent properties and not his property, which we're actually speaking on tonight is the applicant's property. And then the 4th point applies to the grade of the property, and like I mentioned earlier, both the properties directly across the street, which have substantially the same grade, were both required to build sidewalks. And anecdotally, my last little story will be in my neighborhood. We had 3 historic homes. One was 7 years old, one was 50 years old, and the other one was an outbuilding. And everyone said the same thing: we'll never have sidewalks here. Well, guess what? We have sidewalks there now. We have 3 blocks of continuous sidewalks that we probably would have never had due to the reasons that were stated here today. And so as long as we stay resolute as a council, we'll have a community that's walkable, it's enjoyable for everyone. And I would be beside myself if, as a council, we allowed someone to build a brand new home and not require the basic necessities of a home, one of those being a sidewalk.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, and I also want to bring up the safety factor too. During the presentation, we heard the representative for the homeowner talk about how their sidewalk is across the street, and then we heard this homeowner talk about how it's unsafe to be crossing that street in that spot. So you got to have one or the other. You can't have it both ways. And looking at the grading, I drove by it. You're just talking about basically a wall up to where the dirt line is, and then he can maintain that whatever type of brush he wants up there is pretty well separated from the rest. I don't see it being terrible looking or anything else. And as far as them granting a right-of-way, that's nice, but the city isn't going to pick up the cost down the road to build the thing. So if they wanted to go ahead and post the money for the engineer's estimate total, which is trust me, twice as much as it would cost the city to do it versus have a private individual do it, just because of prevailing wage and so on and so forth. So for all those reasons, I'm going to support the Planning Commission's decision.
Kathy, any thoughts on it?
I don't have too much to add, except that we've granted waivers when it's been extremely difficult to do, and even our staff and our city manager has done it. And in this case, our staff is telling us there's no reason to grant a waiver. So I'm going to have to go with staff on that one.
Okay. On the motion, are you going to make comment?
My only comment is we've heard, I don't know, I've heard probably a dozen of these in my time on council, and exceptions are very rare, and there's a reason why, is because as a community, this is something, it preceded me. This is a council's decision that goes back years and years and years. And, you know, I think it would be irresponsible, frankly, to not continue to stick with this, because ultimately it requires, there's just standards, and we're going to require to stick to those standards so that in the end, if it's 5 years, if it's 10 years, if it's 50 years, we have a community that has this continuous walkability that is so important. So there are exceptions, but they're very few. So I'm going to support it too.
With that move, we concur with staff's denial of the sidewalk waiver request and find that based upon the evidence presented, it is appropriate to require an easement for public sidewalk installation, new sidewalk at 239 Avenida La Cuesta.
Second.
Motion by Ham, second by Schwartz. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 4-0. Thanks for coming out.
Go ahead. Okay. Okay. The next public hearing is to consider a request to modify the conditions of approval for site plan permit 98-63 and track map 15718 relating to tree removal and placement in the reserve community.
If there's no cards, I'm ready to make a motion on this.
Well,
We do have staff.
Do we have any cards on it? Hear from staff.
I have two cards. One person only wants to speak if you have questions.
Okay. Cecilia, you have any
Would
comments?
you like me? No, I can make a brief presentation if you'd like me to.
Let's just for the purposes, I think, for the video,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, it'd be a presentation.
Sure. Cecilia Gallardo Daly, Community Development Director. This is a request by the reserve community to modify conditions in their development permit related to tree removal and replacement. When the City Council approved a modification to their permit in 2016, there were some very specific conditions that required that the CC&Rs include language on tree removal and replacement. The reserve is now requesting to modify how the tree removal policy is recorded or put into effect. So rather than amend the CC&Rs, the reserve board would adopt the tree removal and replacement policy and then enter into a separate agreement with the city to ensure that it's implemented.
Thank you, Cecilia. Any questions for her?
I have a question. Was this because of cost to modify the CC&Rs?
No, it was a case of the reserve putting the cart before the horse, and the conditions of approval required them to amend the CC&Rs. They went ahead and took some language to their HOA members, and that language was approved. And when they submitted that language to the city, it wasn't quite what the tree replacement policy required, and they just didn't want to go back to their HOA members and request the modification because it took about a year to do just that piece. So we found an alternative method for them to follow the policy and for the city to feel comfortable ensuring that it would be adequately implemented.
No other questions?
Does this wrap us up with the tree issue in the reserve? I mean, after this evening,
Yes, it would.
We're all good.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good.
Thank you, Cecilia. Let's open the public hearing. We have two cards, and one of them is, well, we'll start with Aaron Reel from, how do you do? Come on up.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Council. I don't really have much to say tonight. I just wanted to introduce myself and just give a brief recap of this whole process. My name's Aaron Reese. I work with Monarch Environmental. We're the third-party horticulture consultants with the Reserve. So I've been working with them on this issue for 2 years now. We're excited tonight to see that it comes to a final resolution. We do thank the city's planning department and the council for working with us on this. And I'd like to just really publicly congratulate the board of directors at the Reserve for really following through with this and taking the right actions. And I think in the end, once we get this agreement finalized tonight, I really think both the city and the community are going to be better for it. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron. Sorry about the last name. I got it wrong.
No problem. My C's look like L's, I guess.
Yeah. Actually, it isn't my fault. I won't apologize. I'm sorry. Yeah. And then Jane, I don't believe the council has any questions on this item, so if you'd like to speak, you can. Otherwise, great. Thank you. With that, I'll close the public hearing.
I move that we adopt Resolution 1843 entitled Resolution City Council of the City of San Clemente, California, amending site plan permit 98-63 and tentative track map 15718 Reserve Landscape Amendment to modify conditions of the approval for the Reserve community relating to the tree removal and replacement.
Second.
Motion by Ham, second by Schwartz. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes 5-0.
Next is a report from the city clerk concerning possible ballot measures relating to transitioning the city treasurer and city clerk to appointive offices rather than elected. At the council meeting of July 31st, council directed that staff agendize the possibility of adding measures to the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election ballot to propose transitioning the offices of city treasurer and city clerk from elected to appointive. It would ultimately be the decision of the city council in office in 2020 to determine whether the ballot measures will be on the ballot in 2020, but this council had requested that the topic be agendized so that a conversation could start. The California Government Code provides that the council may initiate ballot measures asking whether the offices of treasurer and city clerk be appointive. If approved by a majority of the voters voting on the measures, the council shall appoint a city treasurer and city clerk at the expiration of the terms of the incumbent officers, which are scheduled to terminate in December of 2020. The Government Code also allows council at that time to vest the appointment authority with the city manager. There are two options for timing and format of the ballot measures. The first option would be to place the measures on the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election ballot. Because that is the same time that the offices, the terms of office for the two incumbents will expire, the city attorney and also the county's attorneys requested that if you're going to choose that election, that there be two questions. The first question would be, shall the office of city treasurer or city clerk be appointive? And then directly under that, it would say, if the office of city treasurer or city clerk remains elected, who should serve as city treasurer? And then a list of the candidates would follow. It's unclear whether the sequencing of the transition measures and the candidacies would be vulnerable to a legal challenge. But given that it has been used in a prior statewide gubernatorial recall election, the city attorney's office believes that careful structuring of the ballot could significantly reduce exposure. Another option would be to place the transition measures on the March 3rd, 2020 presidential primary election ballot. Because the terms of office for the two incumbents don't expire until later that year, that would negate the necessity for a two-part question, and the only question that would appear would be, shall the office of city treasurer or city clerk be appointive? The cost to add 2 ballot measures to the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election ballot would be $17,000 in addition to the base cost of the election that we're already obligated to buy into, because that we have to elect the council and also the city clerk and city treasurer in November 2020. What it is we're already obligated every 2 years to have an election. When you buy into the election, when you're already in it, all the participants, all the agencies in that election are sharing the cost, right? So if you start adding things after you're already in with that cost, which is around $70,000 or so, over and above that, it's just basically the extra paper that you're using in the sample ballot, because you're already doing your share of the common costs in the sample ballot. You know how to apply for a mail-in ballot. You're already paying for the poll workers. You're paying your share already. So there is some economies of scale where you can start adding the ballot measures, and ballot measures cost about $8,500 per ballot measure just to add on to an election that you're already in.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, if we want to have the determination of the office being appointed versus elected in March of that year, it will cost us $17,000 more.
No, the cost to add it to March would be about $84,000 to $100,000
For this March.
No,
for March of 2020.
For March of 2020, I see. Okay, I'm sorry.
If you just add it to the November 2020 ballot, it's going to cost $17,000 in addition to the...
What we're already spending.
To what you're already, obligated to spend.
And it's really important to say that for a decision like this, participation by the community is critical, and so a November election will always get a higher turnout. So
That's right.
that while the money is important, making sure we hear from everyone is even more important in my view.
Yeah, I was just trying to balance it out with the cost of the applicants having to run a campaign, although I'm assuming that the campaign expense is a little difference between city council and city treasurer.
We're in a weird, well, we're in an unusual place. I'll say the unusual place because we've been fortunate in that it's been fairly uncontested. The clerk, it's always lined up really well, but there are communities in California where it's gone sideways, and it's gone sideways in a really bad way.
Yeah.
Because we rely on Joanne for legal compliance, for all of these items for which she's eminently qualified, and somebody walking on the street that just wants to hold that position, it puts frankly puts the council at risk, it puts the city at risk in a lot of ways for a lot of exposure.
No, I was surprised.
I'm just kind of, yeah.
I was surprised when I got involved with the processes of the city, that we have our city clerk and our city treasurer having to run elections.
Well, one of the joys of having one of the older cities in South Orange County is that we have a lot of things that are kind of holdovers from the way we were built, and this is one of those joys. The oldest, with the exception of San Juan. No San Juan's?
They incorporated 1960.
Yeah, they'll figure out some way to win that title, though. Anyway, but so I've heard the bad side of it. It is a $17,000 expense, but I do think in terms of governance, it's a better choice. By the way, do we have any cards on this?
No.
Are we okay? Okay. So anyway,
yeah, it's just and I agree that the 17. I would have loved to have been able to put it on the ballot early, so that come November, we don't have to worry about them. They don't have to worry about their campaigning, and we don't have to worry about the second question on the ballot. But it's not worth another $70,000 to me to do that.
No, it's fine.
So.
That's very smart. So I think we've got some idea of what we're doing. I'm comfortable providing the direction to put this on the ballot. I don't know if we need to make a motion here.
Well, I have a question of staff.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, Joanne, explain to me exactly how it works if we were to transition to an appointed city clerk position. That means that you instantly become at will and we just say, oh, Joanne, you're out here, we're going to appoint someone else.
Well, if it were to, the voters were to pass it in November of 2020, that's the same year that my term expires in the city treasurer. So at that time, I would no longer be elected, and it would be up to council to appoint me if you want me, or vest in the city manager with an ordinance that would give him authority to choose the city clerk. But the elected would go away. But you have to remember, I serve a dual purpose, a dual function also. I'm also the city's legislative administrator. That would not go away. That in that capacity, which is basically everything that I do with the exception of what the government code says, city clerk shall do this. That component is $500 stipend a month. That would be the difference. A legislative administrator would stay, and in that capacity, I'm responsible. I report to the city manager.
So you would be doing most of what you duties you currently do still as a city administrator, and we'd have
most of them would stay.
We'd have another person as
you would
city
have somebody
clerk.
else sitting here.
Yeah, during meetings, basically.
So, building on Councilmember Ham's question, would the ballot measure include the specification that it's going to be an appointed position at the pleasure of the council, or it's going to be or does the...
that decision is made later.
So we don't need to think about that tonight. And then just so I'm clear, these are going to be two different ballot measures. There's going to be one for the treasurer and one for the city clerk. We're not bundling them together.
It would be awkward to bundle them because city attorney and the county council both felt that it should be a two-part question.
Great. Okay. Okay, but the mechanics of what happens to the position, should the public say to us it shouldn't be an elected position anymore, comes after.
I'm not sure I caught that. The first question is, shall the office be appointed?
Right.
And then underneath, if the office remains elected, then who gets appointed?
Right.
Who do you want? Who do you want elected?
In other words,
no, but I'm saying if it's going to become appointed, the
details.
Whether it's appointed by us or appointed by the city manager.
That would be something that you would decide as soon as I come back to you with the results of the election.
Great. It's later.
Okay.
It's after.
Yes.
Thank you.
For both positions?
For both.
Okay.
And I think that if you want to do it, I think that what your action would be to recommend to the next city council that it consider adding it to the resolution calling them the election.
We should probably vote on that recommendation. Would that be appropriate? Just so we can have a roll call on it. So
we can't just make the decision? We're just...
We're going to bind the future.
It's the same thing on, well, it's the same thing on the term limits.
Well, then if the next council doesn't want it,
they can undo it.
They can, because as soon as you call an election, I have to get the arguments, everything going.
Call the
and
election.
then maybe the 2020 council will say, no, we don't want it. And then we're taking back.
Yeah, we can't.
So I think both of the next items are going to be advisory votes.
Yeah.
For the next council to contemplate. Is that right? They're basically recommendations.
It'd be a recommendation.
No, well, because there's three of us here, so it's not really advisory. I mean, we'd be advising ourselves.
Well, yeah, we're recommending for a future vote.
No, but we'll be here. Me, you, and her will be here for the future vote.
True, but we're not bound to what we voted.
No, I mean, we're not, but it's, so we're going to recommend, I guess we could be really good politicians and recommend to ourselves to do this and then not do it.
Well, that does make a good point.
Well, but it doesn't make sense for us to call, we can't put it up there now because.
Call the election.
Because we can't call election because it starts things in play that we don't
It
want
would
to
be
play.
highly unusual for the three of you to vote for something and then the majority of the council to change their mind in a year.
It would just be one of the three change their mind.
It would be one of the three of you, well, potentially whatever the other two want to do. So let's make the recommendation and then we can figure out where the chips lie afterwards. Fair enough.
So the recommendation is that the 2020 council add it to the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election ballot.
And I'll call a vote on that recommendation. All those in favor of making that recommendation say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? So the recommendation was made with a 5-0 vote from the council.
That was a motion by the mayor, and I seconded it.
Thank you.
We got a new motion. Let's do it properly. I move that we make the recommendation to future councils.
So
Got a second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye. Still.
5-0.
So
Okay.
the two short timers made the, okay.
We just saved your bacon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so then the,
We coerced Steve into it, so when he changes his mind, he can say, oh, I didn't make a
Hey,
motion.
you know, I agreed to put it down so then we will really study it. I've got the language down, I wrote it.
okay, and the next item is report from the city clerk concerning a possible ballot measure relating to term limits for members of the city council and possibility of adopting an ordinance to impose term limits on city commission and/or committee members. At your council meeting of July 31st, council directed that staff agendize the possibility of adding a measure to the November 3, 2020 general municipal election ballot to generally limit consecutive years of service by members of the city council to a combined total of 2 4-year terms with the ability to again serve as a member of the city council after a lapse of service of no less than 2 years. Again, it would ultimately be the decision of the council in office in 2020 to add it to the ballot, but council requested that it be agendized at this time to allow a dialogue to commence. State law specifies that council or the residents of the city may propose by initiative a proposal to limit the number of terms a member of the city council may serve on the city council. Term limits do not become operative unless the proposition is submitted to the electors of the city at a regularly scheduled election and a majority of the votes cast favor its adoption. Pursuant to state law, a term limit ordinance applies prospectively only. This means that if the term limits measure is adopted at the November 2020 election, then the new term limits would apply starting with council members also elected at the November 2020 election. Terms that started before the November 3rd election would not count toward the term limits. The City Council further directed at its July meeting that the possibility of adopting an ordinance to impose term limits on City Commission and/or committee members be agendized for this meeting for discussion. While voter approval is necessary to impose term limits on members of the City Council, the City Council has the authority on its own volition to adopt an ordinance to impose term limits on the city's commissions and committees. If council is interested in establishing commission committee term limits, staff recommends that council determine at this time whether it wishes to impose term limits on all commissions and committees or impose term limits only on specific commissions and committees. This is because historically we receive more applications for commission openings than committee members. There have been some times when I have had to re-advertise to even get enough applicants to fill vacancies. So that's just something for you to consider. So staff at this time recommends that council determine whether you want to recommend to the 2020 council that it add a measure to the November 2020 ballot to impose term limits on council, and also that you determine whether you wish to pursue a term limit ordinance for all or some of the city commissions and committees.
I want to go on record of saying, I think part of the reasoning behind wanting to put this on the agenda and discuss it was for public awareness. Let's get the city, all 7 that are in our audience tonight, but the rest that may look at it, or someone may write about it. But just get them aware that this is something that we are looking at, we want to contemplate. It was inadequate enough to conceive of doing it for this year. It just wasn't enough time. But that is something I think that, I've heard a lot of our residents and voters have talked about it, of wanting us, to look at this and do something about it. So I think it's timely for us to suggest to our future people to my future self to look at it again in November 20th for the November 20th election. The other thing is that I wanted to bring up is for the committee and commission. Maybe we should think about also suggesting there might be a caveat that will allow members to have an additional term if there aren't any candidates up for appointment.
I researched that, and that's not an option. If you adopt a law, an ordinance that says term limits, you can't waive it. What you can do is direct me to advertise again, but you can't waive it.
But we can elect not to apply term limits to the rest of the commissions and committees.
Right. That's totally optional.
See, I feel like they're two different scenarios. One is directly elect, popular vote. There's an idea that the incumbent has a distinct advantage, and at some point they're going to do it. But the council's turnover. If the council is turning over every 8 years, it's going to have an effect also on the commissions and committees, because there's already going to be a natural turnover there, and so it will affect the commissions and committees by extension. So I listen, we have folks on human relations, for example, who served great for years, and they're not. I don't believe that we have much value in terming them out, of those positions. So I for one would like to see. I mean, I'm kind of adhering to this in my own election choices right now. 8 years, and I'm going to take time off. So I obviously am supportive of the term limits component. But I think for commissions, committees, as it's appointed by this council, and that's going to be turning over with regularity, I don't know if it's as natural a fit,
I'd like to remind the council that I think we have coming back to us, we're going to be considering some of our committees and maybe restructuring. So I would not want to do anything at this time, but I think the council picks the committees. I don't know that we need to have term limits.
But it's not but this is an interesting question. This wouldn't be an election question. This is just simply our direction.
Yeah, we
Right.
It's just an ordinance.
They're two separate animals,
So
but you had directed me
I think
to bring back both.
I think that second portion of the conversation should happen concurrently with the structure of the commissions and committees.
Okay.
If there's value to it, if there's a committee which may require it more than another, then that's the conversation that time. I think we should focus on number one definitely for tonight.
I'm good with taking out number 2.
Well, before we jump off the number 2 bandwagon here, and maybe Lori can support this, it seems to me year over year with some of the commissions is we get candidates that are great candidates, and they've been doing it for year over year, and you feel an obligation to reappoint them. If they're willing to volunteer their time, you feel an obligation to reappoint them. And so it seems to me that we've discouraged an awful lot of good candidates, new blood, because they come in and see the same people get reappointed. So the term limits, as outlined here in the staff report, when you take out investment and coastal and human affairs, gives us a good out as a city council to say, hey, maybe it's time for some new blood. The only thing is it's 2-year terms for most of the commissions and committees, or if not all of them, right?
Right.
So I don't know that I'd be supportive of 2 terms. I mean, 4 years is small, maybe a 4-year thing. That way everybody gets 8 and
Is anybody
let's move on. But
is anybody 8 years on planning commission right now?
there's a lot of golf course committee guys that are on 8.
Or 12.
Yeah.
Don Brown, I think.
8 or 10.
Yeah, Julie.
Well, maybe so. I guess, do you want to have that conversation in the context of the structure of the committees, or do you want to have that?
Why don't we have that in the structure of the committees, then we can decide, because we don't have to do it across the board. We can just say this committee or this commission should be more, I'm sorry. We should maybe have this when we talk about the forming of the next cycle of committees and commissions, because we can look through it and say, well, where do we have an issue? And where do we think we want to have blood completely more responsive?
Well, see, so that's part of my concern about it, right, is I don't want to discourage the people that are doing a great job just because we look at it and go, oh, they've been on for 12 years. That's why I think if we look at it holistically, we can say, hey, everyone except for these 3 that are listed, you get 8 years consecutively, and then you have to take a year off.
Or one cycle.
One application cycle off.
Yeah, but I think that's something that we should discuss when we're forming the next formation.
I know, but my concern with that is if, like, let's say we only have planning commission and golf course committee up, and we look and we go, oh my gosh, they've been on for a long time. Let's do it to these 2, and then the next 2 come along, and we're like, oh, these guys are pretty good, okay, so then we don't do it. It just, it
Well, we could,
concerns me that it gets
but we could
very
direct
subjective.
for when that's being scheduled, that we have the same question come up to us in front of it.
When are you guys
Yeah.
looking at the recomposition of the committees and commissions?
Well, you keep
January.
mentioning that our human affairs, they've been on a long time. We've lost all of our longtime people. They're not here anymore.
Well, that's why, that's one of the ones that's been
Well,
separated out.
I'm just wondering, here's the
thing, I want to hear what Lori has to say, because I asked to have this conversation with Lori when she's still in council, because she's been on the longest, so
Yeah.
I'm very curious.
Yeah, so I agree with the idea that it should be part and parcel of the refreshing of the committee structure, because, and then it gives you an opportunity also to ask the committees and commissions what they think makes sense. But, if we end up with the Beaches, Parks, and Recreation Commission, that all of a sudden Coastal Advisory Committee goes away, or Watershed Task Force goes away, or we fold the Golf Course Committee into Beaches, Parks, and Recreation, or these are all hypotheticals. We decide that the Planning Commission, we're better off having a Transportation Commission and a Planning Commission, and they're two standalone things, or the value is...
Subcommittee.
Yeah, so I think there's an opportunity to really bring fresh energy to the whole structure, and myself, maximum community involvement is a plus, but also having meetings that burn staff time just for the sake of meetings, not so much. So I'd put it there, and
then we'll look at it.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, how often do we see committees being canceled, meetings being canceled because they just don't have a...
Or they're strictly informational, and it's kind of...
There's no criticality to them.
Yeah.
There's no function.
Okay, so we're striking that one until we come up
For
with...
now, just for now.
So I'll make a motion for a recommendation, a vote for recommendation on the term limits for the council. I think the recommendation as currently stated is a good one, and I think that it's a reasonable solution. I don't agree with the ban of service after 8 years, you're done forever, type of thing. I don't think that's a productive way to do it, but I do think most of the councils that I've seen in Orange County follow something very similar to this, and so I would make a motion that we provide this recommendation to the future council.
I'll second it.
Yeah. And I agree, and I think that the stand down should be for like a full term, not forever. But we can discuss that when we discuss it.
Yeah. One election cycle is what you just said right there. So
I said
it's 2 years.
Or until basically you break the incumbency.
We can discuss that.
Yeah.
Sure. That's my motion. Motion by Brown, second by Ham. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? 5-0.
Oral Communications Part 2, I don't have any cards.
Oh, yes, you do.
I do?
I see one running.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry, there's no card up here at the time we called for it.
I got pee so bad.
I'm off.
Wouldn't it?
I'm off it out of order.
That's my microphone.
I actually, I
Hold on
don't
one
think
second. Wait a second.
Okay.
Mr. Malamud?
Sir.
There we go. I had to call the card.
I don't think I'll be able to make the next council meeting. I wanted to thank all the council members for their years of service, especially the outgoing members who've done a great job and have supported our city. And I wanted to, since Kathy's here, congratulate her on her victory last night. And, if you guys want to make a recommendation, I have one small one, and that would be to follow Robert's Rules of Order. And like the last two things we had, they went on for 15 minutes each. They could have been done in a minute or two. That's just my recommendation. Robert's Rules of Orders would shorten it because each of you get to speak and rather than the crosstalk. But that's I think I would agree with what you guys said. Let the next council decide if they want to do that. But I do think everybody in this town is appreciative of this council and their members and what they've done for the community. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Any other cards, members of the public?
Okay. City Manager?
No.
City Attorney?
Nothing more tonight.
Under council members, update on fuel transfer operations at the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. Councilmember Swartz.
Yeah, I hope you guys had a chance to look at that, that I had added to the back of your book. It is something that we've been struggling with and will be continuing to struggle with. What we're not getting Edison has been any type of actual response to our demand that there be 24/7 monitoring, and that monitoring levels be accessible 24/7 to everybody. And I've been hammering that now for 2 meetings, 6 months. But we don't seem to be getting the message across yet. So we will keep on that ploy. As you see in the report, they're saying the slippage didn't create that much of an issue, and it didn't put us at risk, but it's not impossible that it could have. It was kind of like the language as you read through it. And the point is, it shouldn't have taken a month and a half and an employee feeling he had to come out as a whistleblower to get this out to the public. The accident should be reported when it happened to all affected areas that are involved with this. That includes City of San Clemente, City of Oceanside, and Pendleton, and everywhere around. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing the commitment from Edison to do that. We are disappointed so far, and we will be continuing to press on the situation. Any questions?
What's the stall out on the monitoring? I thought they were supportive of that 2 years ago.
They, it appears as though, because monitoring is never just flat, as particles might fly through, it may spike every now and then, and people wouldn't understand with panic. And so it's the interpretation of the monitoring information and how they can put it out there on a more of an average type of flow of information, so that a incidental thing won't occur. It's like if a bird flew in front of it and caused a spike or whatever, happened to be, that maybe that would cause someone to panic out there. So that's kind of what they're looking at. There's a company that manufactures these sensor units that are saying, no, that's not the way it'll happen. That's not the way it works. It's reliable. So they're having that battle, and I'm sure we're going to end up. I would just like to get them to the point of agreeing, yes, we're going to do it, and then, because damn well it's going to take them, if we're lucky, a year to go through testing, modifications, and finally get it out and finally get it in. So the sooner they at least come out publicly and say, yeah, we're going to do it, we're at least moving towards that goal. The fact remains, from everything that I've seen and everything that's been discussed, we're not getting rid of that waste anytime soon. So for it to be in a safe manner, and for us to be able to see the monitoring, and for them to come out and say, yes, City of San Clemente is being placed in a position of hosting a nuclear storage site that they didn't apply or request to do so. So we're actually being forced to do so. And in that way, I want to see us being compensated for everything that's going to cost us to maintain emergency awareness and everything else associated with it. And we haven't seen any of that movement yet either. But I know that our outgoing mayor did a lot during his tenure with the CPA trying to get that done. I continue. I'm one voice. So hopefully we'll get some type of feedback, positive.
What about a trip to DC to talk to some federal regulators that we're actually getting on that list?
Yeah, well, I think we need to get a little more further in from this report back, and a little more. I think the next meeting is going to be very important to see what comes out of that before we try to. I'm trying to have us fight as few number of fronts at the same time as possible.
Are you having a similar experience
Yes. Okay.
Well, I'm grateful you brought this report forward here, because this was one of the challenging things about the ongoing, the what do they call it, real-time reporting of the data, is that it wasn't necessarily indicative of the health and safety of the plant and the people around it. And so, there's already a tremendous amount of fear built around this question. A lot of it's based on, some people are very knowledgeable about it, but a lot of it's based on presumptions and other information. And so it is important to be methodical, to read the reports and find some solutions here, but obviously more transparency is better, so I think that would be the end goal. But I commend you for your service on that. Council member items. Lori, anything? Kathy, anything? Chris? So I've got a few things. First of all, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, we had a recent town hall meeting where we had the toll road come and OCTA, and we had a presentation. It was a very valuable meeting. And what we did is we set up a video production booth where people could go in, because it's difficult in public comment to be able to capture 400 people's comments in a single meeting. And so there was a separate video production booth where you could go in and get recorded and go on the record officially on the TCA's plans for San Clemente and what your impressions are. And it was great. We got a ton of people who got recorded doing so. And there was a member of the public that said, well, why don't you do this more often? You open it up at different events and let people record their comments, and it's something we can forward on. And so, by the way, is Cade here anymore? I just wonder if he's in the back room. Cade, are you here? If you are, come on out while I'm chatting. And so, anyway, and so the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the video production booth is going to be set up again down at the community center. And it's going to be for people, to go on record. And Kate, if you wouldn't mind stepping the microphone real quick over here. I know you love this part. This is your heart's desire, fondest thing. I want to recognize Cade here because at the TCA forum, he was the one who did all the technology work. How'd it go? It seemed like it went very seamless. It was very smooth on how it went.
Well, to be clear, I coordinated it. I didn't do all the technology work, but it did go extremely well. And we took some measures to ensure that that meeting was broadcast in high quality and without fail in a location that's typically hard to do. So
yeah, it seemed to work. Everyone had really positive comments. We had a lot of folks that also put themselves on the record and made those video comments. And so we're going to set that up the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Yeah. At the community center, and does that coincide with the Holly Jolly Hoopla? Okay, so it's going to be. Do we even call it that anymore? No. Santa's. You know what? I like Holly Jolly Hoopla. I'm going to call it Holly Jolly Hoopla because I got the microphone. But anyway, so we're going to have it down there, and I would ask members of the public to come down and make your thoughts known on this question, because we're aggregating all of this and we're communicating with the TCA. But I want to commend you. Thanks for doing such good work for us.
Did you
welcome? Appreciate that. Really do. No. Was there something? Okay. Second item is. Okay. Something I also was one of the first votes we did on council, and. This came up only because I was recently contemplating revisiting this question, and it was on the styrofoam ban. We have an ordinance we put into place. It was one of the first votes I did when I was on council, and it was a complete ban on styrofoam products in San Clemente. The city had one in place since 2004, and there's an exception piece. It's called undue hardship, and there's a whole series of undue hardships and exceptions you could do, but none of them. It's a very stringent and rigid application of it, but I don't think we've ever tested or verified since then if it's how effective the ban has been or whatever the case may be. That's not the question I want tonight, though. What I wanted to do was to chat about potentially creating a separate category of undue hardship or exception where a store or a business comes into town that wants to use it for, say, a signature item or something that they want to include that has, for example, styrofoam cups at Chick-fil-A, can apply for that exception without proving that it's going to bankrupt them. You know, that is something that either the customers want or they want to do, and then the customers can themselves decide if that's what they want to do.
So do you want to agendize that?
I do. I want to agendize it, and I just want to have a conversation about it, because I do think that we've done a good job, we've applied the ban, but I do think there's more room for exceptions where it's necessary, and the customers can decide if it's something they value or like.
Well, Golden Spoon had that signature packaging, and we made them walk away from it for their stores in San Clemente, so.
And I'd like to see if we can loosen it up a bit. I think it's been very successful, but I'd like to see if maybe there's an opportunity for some of these stores which have signature packaging questions, and that honestly, it's not going to blow up the environment tomorrow if we do it, that we can have some latitude to allow those to happen.
Yeah, and I completely support us doing that.
So, anyway, I'd like to put that on the agenda, first have that conversation. Next meeting, provide some direction. Yeah, next meeting. And you know, it's not like I want to do a unilateral rollback of everything, because I think a lot of businesses have gotten comfortable with what they're doing. But I'd like to see that if a business wants to come in.
If that's going to be on the agenda, could the staff report include the amount of waste that we have? We've got to have some sort of measurement on how effective this program is.
I don't know if it's ever been counted since. I don't know if it gets measured anymore. I'd love to know that. I would really love to know that.
So we can request to know it and find out.
Because what happened was...
So I'm making the request, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I think that's fine. We'll include that in staff report.
Okay, and when are we bringing it back?
The next meeting.
Next
meeting.
Really?
I want to weigh in on it before I get off council.
Okay.
All right, last item is, I was surprised to learn today that, and it's because it's become an election issue, and I just want to provide guidance to the city manager and to the council also, that, in our increasing polarized and political environment, that our executive management, our chief of staff folks have no recourse or no direction regarding if in fact they become caught in a crossfire, which happens, that there's no severance. It's clear for the city manager, it's clear for the rest of our employees, but our directors levels, our executive management has no severance direction from us officially. It's on a case-by-case basis. I'd really like to contemplate something before we turn it over December 4th that would provide direction to the city manager, or at least more of a principal document. I don't even know if it comes in an ordinance form, or something that says, if this is going to happen, we should at least provide some cushion, some severance item.
So I support your sentiment, but I think that to do that properly, a lot of benchmarking has to be done with other cities, and so I think it's unrealistic to expect it to come back at the next meeting in your tenure. So
I would agree. It's
and
really,
I think also having a conversation with the city manager before we put it on the agenda is appropriate as a next step. And see how.
I suggest we have this on the next closed session agenda. We can discuss it and fill it out as to what we want, the benchmarks of what we want staff to come back to when we think it's reasonable for it to get agendized.
As part of the city manager's performance, yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go with the mayor on this one. I think staff will have plenty of time to do it within the next 2 weeks.
the only reason I say that is because
I think it's out of line not to talk to the city manager first before we go forward with a request for a staff report, because it's his people. We hire him to manage those people, so I think it's important.
Sure,
not to rush it into.
I certainly don't want to rush it, but I do think that I'd like to at least see what the best practices are, and I can provide the direction right now that we look into it. And you know what? And to the credit, if the staff report doesn't provide the information, if we don't have enough, we push it to the next council. But I'd really like to contemplate at the next meeting.
Okay, I'll agree.
Are you okay with it?
Yeah. And I think we were all surprised to find that out. So, we care about our employees. We'd like to look at that.
So I won't agree, because I think I appreciate the sentiment, but we pay the city manager to have a vision for how he wants his organization to run, and none of us have had an opportunity to discuss, this idea with him, and I just feel like there's a process that should be observed, and we should respect the fact that it's arguably council overreach to be going down to that next level without dealing with the city manager.
I have no doubt. Why don't we do the following? So let's put it in next closed session to have this conversation. with James, but I'd like to have it on the agenda for the open session too. And if we feel like we have a satisfactory discussion, I'll be the first one to say we don't need to have this agenda item here. And move it on and say, I think we have the direction we need, I think we're comfortable with what was going on. And if in the closed session we don't get that satisfaction, we need to provide more public direction, then we have the session in the open session to talk about it. If we can satisfy, if I can get satisfied in closed session and then we have our policies and internal and we feel comfortable, we're on the same page, I'm comfortable with that. But if it needs to be something that we need to enact publicly, then we should have that agenda item out there as well.
So I'm assuming the staff report would come from the city manager.
Yes.
Right? So we will be hearing from you.
Well, so why don't we...
But I want to discuss in closed session before we go.
Let's do that path. Closed session and open session, have 2 agenda items. If we feel like we get satisfaction in closed session, I'll be the first one to say, move it off of the open session, and we don't need to chat about it.
Or we can just announce it, closed session.
We got it resolved.
I agree.
That's my only issue. So that's my request. I think we have council direction.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all I got. Oh, the parade. Who's announcing the parade? I know. There's a lot of stuff here. And listen, I've only got a few weeks left. I'm going to filibuster until... I know, but the parade, we have a parade on Friday. We have a parade, the 2-4 Welcome Home Parade. We're always good on these events for the military, and I would really ask the community to show up and support our adopted battalion 2-4 at noon on Friday. Because who in the council is going to be there?
I don't know yet, because my calendar...
Lori, are you? You're no, Chris?
I'll be protecting the city.
We need help holding up that banner, so you need to show up. I think it's a big banner.
If I don't have to be carting someone in a wheelchair somewhere that same time, I will be there, but
He's got other things going on.
Things juggled.
Yeah. So, but that's great. Well, listen, we've got the 2-4 Welcome Home Parade coming up this Friday at noon. We're excited to have them home. We're grateful for their service, and we ask that the members of the community come out and support them because they have done wonderful work overseas in protecting us, and we should show appreciation for them. So, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, second reading, ordinance number 1659, modifying the definition of smoking to include vaping and electronic devices. I move that we adopt ordinance number 1659, entitled an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Clemente, California, amending the San Clemente Municipal Code, Chapter 8.64, to define smoking to include vaping and electronic smoking devices.
Motion by Doncheck, second by Ham. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Kathy's absent, 4-0.
And I move that now we adjourn to the next regular council meeting, November 20th, here in the council chambers, 100 Avenida Presidio. Closed session at 5 p.m., regular business meeting 6 p.m.
Motion by Doncheck, second by Schwartz. All those in favor? Aye. Passes 4-0. Good night, folks.